supreme wisdom. Student enrollment, that's what the class of God students enrolling. Supreme wisdom, I study it hard. The study of myself is the study of God. Supreme wisdom, write your letter, get your X. Supreme wisdom, that's what you'll be getting next. Supreme wisdom, some call it the lessons, but I call it life, actual facts, no guessing.
Proud of that. So here we are at week 2 of this particular foundation class, which is the subject of history is best qualified to award our research. So last week, it's kind of been a second since we've had foundation class locally, because last week we had the national business meeting. And so I'm going to start off with the recap of what we went over last week. So, of course, this title comes from, or it's like a piece of a quote, or not a quote, but the quote comes from a letter that the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad sent out to the students. But last week, we dealt with the year 1914. And so we started off from the supreme wisdom where it asks, or where it commands you tell us the exact date of the expiration of the devil's civilization, and the answer is expired in 1914. And so we asked the question about what happened in the year 1914. And so we said some things that happened is that Marcus Garvey started his movement. We said that the Omega Psi Phi, they had become incorporated officially, even though they started in 1911, they became officially incorporated in 1914. And what else we said? We said in the Ahmadiyya movement, they had named their next successor in the line of leadership. And so there were many things going on in the world, but specifically, and I'll say the one that had the most profound effect in the world that happened at that time was World War I, which started in 1914. But interestingly enough, I don't think I mentioned this last week, but when I looked it up, it was interesting because we know that the Alphabet Fire Company's parents were part of Marcus Garvey's movement, and that was the time that that movement was getting started. And also, the minister, when he was in college, he was trying to pledge Omega Psi Phi at that time. That's why I mentioned those things. I just found it interesting to do a deep dive of history. So, going further, this is the entirety, or at least of the message of the letter that I got off of the Final Call website from an article from Brother Jabril Muhammad. And Brother Malik, if you would care to read all the way up to start at first and end at history.
First, history is above all our study.
Stop. That first qualifier alone. I'm sorry. That first, because I can't see. But okay. I'm good now? Okay. So that first qualifier is very important. It said history is above all our studies. So that means out of all the studies that you can do, history is above all in this regard. Okay?
Yeah.
You continue reading.
The most attractive and best qualified to be rewarded, to reward our research as it develops the spring of mold of human action and displays the consequence of circumstances which operate most powerfully on the
Destinies.
the destiny of human beings. Second, it stands true that we, the lost foundation of Islam in the wilderness of North America, have not applied ourselves to the study of history.
stop. But that last statement, again, it stands true. So that means that this in fact is a fact. That it stands true that we, the Lost Foundation of Islam in the Wilderness of North America, have not applied ourselves to the study of history. That's what the second one says. But the first statement is said that history is above all of our studies, the most attractive and best qualified to reward our research. So that means that if we're doing research, looking for the reward, and we're not studying history, we're doing this in vain. And that is a part of the reason why I was inspired to do this class on this specific topic, because it was upon trying to find a topic for this, I went into an extended fast and was listening to the Honorable Minister Farrakhan in the Time and Work Must Be Done lecture series. And while listening to him, I was just amazed at how much of what he was going over that he said in 2013 was more pertinent today in 2019 than it was 6 years ago. And especially what he went over in regards to America's errant foreign policy and also the shadow government. And if you pay attention even halfway, just a little bit, to politics, the news, and foreign affairs, you see that the world is in upheaval, and there are rumblings and rumors of wars. And he went right at the root of where all of these wars stem from. He's just turning the camera. He's just turning the camera. Or is it cutting off the? Is it cutting off the? Okay. So he went right at the root. Oh, what
No, you can get in front of it. But I'm saying, if you pass the podium, then you too far.
I'm going to get back and forth between here and here. Because I want to be closer to the class. So we're going to do this photo. But every now and again, I might see something better on the screen. So
There you go.
Okay. So yes, it was in listening to the Honorable Minister Farrakhan break down these events that I found it pertinent to maybe for those of us who missed it, just like I did in 2013, to bring it back up again today for all of us to see. And specifically with this, what I strive to achieve in this class series is to really do a deep dive of recent history to show how we are in this predicament that we are in today. But it's gonna require you, because this is a little bit different from some of the other courses that we had, because they were, strictly coming from the teachers. We might have brought in, a little bit of something from everywhere, but this is going to be just a very in-depth dive of history, which is really the study of causality. And it's important because within that time period, the Honorable Minister Farrakhan told us that he had a more than a vision experience that predicted, prophesied, some might say, the events that are going on today. And based upon what is going on today, it proves him true. And maybe some of us missed it because he said it, at a time where things hadn't happened yet. So I'm just kind of showing us the efficacy of the Honorable Minister Farrakhan's words, if I may. So, Sister Demoiselle, can you read from "But Rather," and you can take us all the way finish the page.
But rather to folly, having lots of the bread of idleness, and when an effort was made to the above effect of history study, it was to our detriment by not knowing what history that was more valuable, to aid us in the knowledge of our own nation. The wise man is the one who have who have made a careful study of the past events of ancient and modern history. The knowledge of the future is judged by the knowledge of the past.
Pause. Pause. So did you catch that? It is the wise man is the one who has made a careful study of the past events of ancient and modern history. So just in case you're like, why are we going over the white man's history, right? What does this have to do with us? I mean, it directly has something to do with us because they're the ones that brought us over here. They're the reason why we, particularly black men and women in America, in this condition, but as well, they're the reason why the entire world are in the predicament that it is. And so we started off with Sister Deborah going back all the way to the beginning. Who is the original man? And we dealt with ancient history, and that's actually the most ancient we can get. And then we even came up further up in time, and I don't think we dealt with the history of the moon yet. But we even dealt with the making of Delta, right? So we are taking a journey through time. And now here we are today. And based off of our study of the past events, we can see where we're going in the future. I just put a score like that there. Baton.
I'm saying, subhanAllah, which means glory to God. There's no such thing as a white man's history because he has a very limited history of 6,000 years compared to the black man or the original man whose history goes way beyond that. There's also what they call an axiom in history. Axiom is a statement usually held to be universally true, and that is, he who fails to study the past is doomed to repeat it. And when you study in history, that's one of the axioms they teach you right off the bat, that one of the primary reasons for studying history is you don't want to repeat.
Absolutely, and especially if the history wasn't too good, right? I mean, if it's a good history, like, I'm ready to repeat.
But some of us Negroes, when we hear our history, especially dealing with slavery and stuff, the first thing a lot of us Negroes say is, I don't want to hear that, man, and that's too sad, and why can't we just let the past go? And why y'all got to keep bringing that up, because that happened and that's over with. Not knowing that can repeat itself, and a sidebar to that would be the so-called Jews with the Holocaust. The Holocaust was like 13 years. And they repeat and repeat and repeat, won't let you forget. And, they adamant about not forgetting them little 13 years, supposedly, that, Hitler dealt with them.
And I'm pretty sure those 13 years felt like they stretched on to eternity. When you're in the midst of a trial or a crisis, it feels like time just stops and you're stuck there. So, but yes, like you said, but in comparison to, other suffering.
I think the last class, we were kind of talking a little bit about that so-called Holocaust thing because, some people don't believe that happened. Or it was as magnified as the Jews make it out to be. Especially, I remember Iran and the little crazy leader they had of Iran at one time, he just completely dismissed that never happened. So, on one hand, some people believe it happened, on another hand, they got people who believe it didn't happen.
Right. But you brought up exactly the point that I was trying to make, is that we study past, because as you said, those who don't study past fail to repeat the history, doomed, even better. So Sister David said you could finish that, finish the sentence, the paragraph, and then we'll.
There are men born with a gift of prophecy, while some are trained into the knowledge by intense study of the past events of history. I'm trying to figure that out.
Now that right there is big. This little section will come up later once we get further down history, but we're going to continue to go back over and over and over this edict and pull out more and see how it's more pertinent as we go through this course. So now that we see what kind of started this on us on this path and why we chose this particular period of time, let's recap of what we went over last class. And so we dealt with starting in 1914 because that was the beginning of World War I. And so we moved forward through the different events, and here's another particular event that happened in 1917 called the Balfour Declaration, where an English politician, he reached out to the wealthy Jews that were in England, who were actually Zionists. And up to that point in World War I, the Allied powers of the World War I were actually losing this battle. They were actually losing. But then they reached out to some powerful Jews, because I mean that's what they were. I'm not being offensive, but they reached out to a powerful Jewish man. And the next year, they won the war. So from 1914 up to 1917, the Allied powers were really not winning. As we went over last week, it was kind of the stalemate that was going on. But after this declaration, then they end up winning the war the next year. And so then World War I ends in 1918. In 1919, there was the Paris Peace Conference, and as part of this peace conference, there was the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. Thank you. Hey, Versailles sounds French to me, like, hey, but hey, the Treaty of Versailles, where all the Allied powers agreed to make Germany pay reparations for all of the people or the forces that won in the war. Okay, and then also as a ramification later down the line, because we in particular with last time we were in class, we kind of focused on the Ottoman Empire, who was actually a part of the losing side, or as they call the Central Powers, and we kind of looked at World War I from the Ottoman Empire's perspective. And I mean, why did we choose the Ottoman Empire? I mean, because we're Muslims. That's why we looked at that. But there are many ramifications even outside of the Muslim world. But something interesting happens as a result of this chain of events. And this has to do with the geopolitics that we will even get further into in this week as opposed to last week. So now, in 1922, we saw the end of the Ottoman Empire, which was an empire which is different from a country or a state, to where they controlled vast lands that were outside of, like the home territory. And in 1924, we saw the end of the Ottoman Caliphate, which is the highest Muslim authority in the land, which is the Caliphate. These are the successors to Prophet Muhammad were supposed to be. And we saw the end of that reign, which had lasted up until that point. It jumped empires, but still it was the recognized successors of the Prophet. And in 1939, World War II begins, which is another war. In World War II, as we saw last time we were in class, that it was a carryover from the tensions of World War I. Specifically with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the harsh reparations that were demanded upon the Germans gave rise to this figure that we call Adolf Hitler. Yes. And we saw the rise of him because he was able to galvanize the German people who had basically been bankrupt back to the Stone Ages, and he was able to play off of the furor that was in people's hearts, for their country and for justice, and he was able to mobilize them to war again against their oppressors. And then World War II begins, And then in 1941, as a part of World War I, we see the beginning of the Holocaust, where it was a ethnic cleansing, it's genocide, purportedly, of the Jewish people in Germany, but also in just Europe. Because so this is where we see the Holocaust come in, and the Holocaust was interesting because at this end of World War I, there was some agreements that were made amongst the different powers about the establishment of the Jewish homeland, right? And so the Jewish homeland, immediately after World War I ended, they were in talks about delivering on the promises of a Jewish homeland, but they were not able to get that immediately after World War I because while the British promised the Jews a homeland, they also had promised the Arabs their own territory as well, their independence from the Ottoman Empire as well. And so at the end of World War I, they were not able to establish their Jewish homeland, their home state. And so it was out of the events, and really specifically the Holocaust, that really gave the Zionists the push that they needed from the general population to get the push for the Jewish homeland. And so in 1945, after the Holocaust and World War I, but World War I ends, make sure they had the Holocaust in there, and then not shortly after World War I, in 1948, the Jewish state of Israel was founded. And so we see how none of these, well, we talked about it last week, but none of these events, if none of these events happened, we would have never been able to do this in 1948. And so what we're going to attempt to do today is to go back, because we did a very broad stroke over a very long period of time, especially when things are happening every day in this time, in this period of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the beginning of World War I, and then focus on the Ottoman Empire again, but see specifically how did this stuff take place. Last week we just kind of said it took place, but now we're going to look at exactly the tactics that it took for this to take place, because it's important to understand how these things happen, because again, when we see this going on at that time, we can look around today and see the exact same thing is going on. So, what I will say is that I'm not a historian. And again, this is not everything that happened, because this is a war that took place in multiple countries all around the world, and there were things that were happening every day. So I'm still going to look at it from the perspective of the Ottoman Empire, but we're going to look at some of the tactics that happened and exactly what led to this. And we can even look at how this changed the geopolitics of those areas still to this day. So, World War I was from 1914 to 1918. World War I was an international conflict that in 1914 to 1918 embroiled most of the nations of Europe, along with Russia, the United States, the Middle East, and other regions. The war pitted the Central Powers. In the Central Powers on one side, we have mainly Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Okay? So, it might help us to diagram this out. Oops. So, in World War I, we have the Central Powers. And the Central Powers include Germany,
Australia.
not Australia.
Austria.
Yeah. So that should be the Austria-Hungary. See, we don't even know what Austria-Hungary is, because of the geopolitics and the deals that were made, that territory was carved up and renamed.
Ottoman Empire.
Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and so this war pitted the Central Powers against the Allies. And the Allies, mainly France, something else? You gonna say Great Britain?
Russia.
Russia. Great Britain,
Yeah.
Russia,
Italy.
and Italy, Japan, okay, and the United States. We cannot predict the United States. Now, interestingly, in 1914, at the turn of the century, look who were allies. Isn't there an issue with Russia today? So why? So the allies of yesterday are now the enemies today. In World War II, wasn't Japan on the opposing side? So how does this all happen? How is yesterday's friends tomorrow's enemies? Okay. And I found even just watching, looking at the news feed today, I saw some disturbing things that were going on. Now it seems like we're back in conflict with Turkey, and Turkey is attacking Syria and all kind of. We're gonna look at this because we're gonna have to understand some geography, because I know most of us don't understand geography. So we're gonna learn it today. We're never gonna forget it.
We're not Donald Trump.
No, I think it was Donald Trump. He said that he was in Israel. He said that he just finished his Middle East tour. He didn't realize he was still in the Middle East. And George Bush before him said that Africa was a country. So, and the World War ended with the defeat of the Central Powers. So at the end of World War I, the Central Powers lost. Okay, so the fall of the Ottoman Empire was key to the Central Powers losing, because the Central Powers, mainly Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, out of these forces, the Ottoman Empire was seen as the weakest. So the Allies, they thought if we were going to go against them, let's attack the weakest out of all of them. And so they sought to target the Ottoman Empire, who's a part of this alliance, to make the whole thing come down. And the reason at that time they called the Ottoman Empire the sick man of Europe, because the Ottoman Empire was on the decline from its previous glory, as we showed last week, the maps of what the Ottoman Empire used to cover, and in 1914, how much that had shrank up until that time. And then the Ottoman Empire had just lost a bunch of land in wars that they had just fought, and also because they were not as industrial as the other countries. So they were behind on the industrialization that happened around that time. So, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, at the start of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was already in decline. The Ottoman Turks entered the war in 1914 on the side of the Central Powers and were defeated in 1918. Under a treaty agreement, most of the Ottoman territories were divided between Britain, France, Greece, and Russia. The Ottoman Empire officially ended in 1922 when the title of Ottoman Sultan was eliminated. Turkey was declared a republic in 1923. So before 1923, you didn't have a country named Turkey. It wasn't until that after they lost the war and their lands were carved up, Turkey was what we call Turkey today, was all they were able to hold on to. And then also, it went from an Islamic state to a secular state. So, in 1914, in 1914, this is what the land that the Ottoman Empire included, okay? And so as you can see, that's some of modern Iraq, Syria, and this area we know is in the Arabian Peninsula, but specifically over here, what places fall in there, Muslims?
Say what?
What major, significant places fall in this little strip of land? I said Muslims, y'all should at least know this geography. As a Muslim, what major geographical?
The Middle East? Are they not Middle East?
Palestine.
I don't know what you mean.
Because I'm trying. This is a map. Can you see?
No.
Okay, you can't see. That's why. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let me take my hand. This strip of land is not on this map, but what is there? There are some important places, Muslims, that you should know that were part of the Ottoman Empire. This is the Ottoman Empire, all this area in here. I said, what major geographical location is in this little area? Muslims. Mecca and Medina. And you also named another one. Palestine is somewhere up there as well. So we need to keep an eye on this area, okay? So at the beginning of the war, this is the land that the Ottoman Empire included. Okay? So, and even this map even goes. It says that Egypt was controlled by the British. What is that? You have the Italians on some of Ethiopia. The British were down here as well. So you have British territories surrounding all of the, on the opposite side, basically, of the Ottoman Empire. So you have these different colonial European territories that surround this area. So you have Russia up here. So, yes. But it's important to know that this is where they started off. So, World War I began. It says, after the war broke out in the summer of 1914, the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia, held many discussions regarding the future of the Ottoman Empire. And Britain, France, and Russia at the beginning of the war were called the Triple Entente. And these countries here. And now, fighting on the side, Russia and held many discussions regarding the future of the Ottoman Empire, now fighting on the side of Germany and the Central Powers and its vast expanse of territory in the Middle East, Arabia, and Southern Europe. Okay? So it says in March 1915, Britain signed a secret agreement with Russia, whose designs on the empire's territory had led the Turks to join forces with Germany and Austro-Hungary in 1914. So at the beginning of the war, Russia wanted some of that Ottoman territory. So now, in secret agreements, Russia and Britain made an agreement called the Constantinople Agreement in 1915 with designs on getting some of the Ottomans' territory. Okay? And so, without getting too much into like the details of war, basically the Russians wanted control of the Ottoman territory that controlled like the waterways into the to the Mediterranean, so they can do business. So they needed that Ottoman land to get from Russia into the Mediterranean. So they wanted specifically that piece of land. And so this secret agreement, in order to get this land, carve off this land from the Ottoman Empire, led to the Gallipoli campaign, which lasted from 1915 to 1916. And so the Gallipoli campaign of 1915 to 1916, also known as the Battle of Gallipoli, or Gallipoli, I heard some people say, or the Dardanelles campaigns, was an unsuccessful attempt by the Allied powers to control the sea routes from Europe to Russia during World War I. So, because of this agreement that the British and who? The Russians made, so this is an agreement between Britain and Russia. They made, Russia said, you know, we agree to give you the Ottoman territory that controls the sea routes, right? Because again, when we look at here, Russia, right, if they want to get into this area right here, what do they have to go to? The Ottoman Empire. They have to go to the Ottoman Empire if they want to do any sea trade, right? Increase their sea trading capacity. So now, it led to this campaign, but guess what? During this campaign, the Allied powers lost. It was unsuccessful, okay? So they lost. So that was actually a major victory for the Ottoman Empire. Again, this is 1915 to 1916, and we said up until 1917, the Allied powers were losing. They actually were not doing too well. So this is an example of an attempt to get the Ottomans land, and they actually fought the Ottomans in this area. So now, moving on to 1916, which we get to the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And so on May 19, 1916, representatives of Great Britain and France. So now, at first it was Great Britain and Russia, and now Great Britain and France are talking to each other. So it says, Great Britain and France secretly reached an accord known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, by which most of the Arabs' land under the rule of the Ottoman Empire are to be divided to British and French spheres of influence with the conclusion of World War I. And so this agreement is very important. This is a map. This is a part of the map. This is not a book map. This is part of the map from that original agreement, I believe. I'm on the internet doing my own research. So. But what's important about this is that these people who carved up this land, specifically the people put together, they hadn't even really been to that area. It was just some people, some Europeans in a conference room just decided, to get out a map, and they're like, okay, we want this, I want this, I want this. And they just making agreements that they don't have the authority, they don't even control the land. So how can they say that, I'm going to promise to give you this land when you don't even have control or authority over it? So they just in the backroom deal saying, we just gonna carve up this place and get some for me and you. But the thing is that, again, they were losing. The Allied powers were losing at this point. So their thing is to carve up the Ottoman Empire because they have oil-rich lands and things like that that were going on at the time. So they're like, there's a lot of strategic locations. They get access to the Suez Canal. They're real close to a lot of things. So we're just gonna carve it up, and then when we win the war, we're just gonna give you, give me. Now, they have to come up with a plan to ensure that they win, so they can get what they want. And that's where we go to where they really start attacking the Ottoman Empire. And they didn't do it, they first did it with a military campaign, just straight on, and then they lost. So now they're like, okay, we gotta get a little bit smarter. Now we're gonna do kind of a intelligence campaign, right? Just running in didn't work too well, so now we're gonna try to do some diplomacy. We're gonna try diplomacy and see if that works. And so what they did is that they reached out to some of the Arab leaders who resided in the Ottoman Empire to get them, to see if they could get them to turn on the Ottoman Empire. And so what you have to understand is that at the time, the Ottomans had just recently changed from like a monarch to a constitutional republic. They were changing their form of government and moving to a more modern secular government. And so, and at that time, there was a Turkish nationalist movement that was going on, where the Turkish really wanted to have their own Turkish state. But at the same time, they're leaders of an empire, right, that has many ethnic groups in it. They have many people under their control, and they're also the seat of the Islamic Caliphate. So, they have all these people under their control, but not all Muslims are the same ethnic group, right? And so the Turkish, they ended up getting over becoming the Caliphate. But the thing about it is that Prophet Muhammad himself was an Arab. And now you have the leader of all the Muslim worlds that's not an Arab. And there are people who are Arabs that have no problem with that. Yes, ma'am?
They're definitely the Turks, Caucasian.
Right. And so you have the Arab leaders who are basically, light-skinned, right?
Yeah.
These light-skinned rulers trying to tell us, because what they were doing is they were trying to, push their culture on people. They were trying to push their language on people. So they didn't, they wanted people in their empire to speak Turkish. Turkish is not Arabic. So they were trying to change, and make the empire under their culture. And there were Arabs that didn't like it. And one of those was this man, Hussein ibn Ali al-Hashimi. And this man is, Hussein ibn Ali al-Hashimi was a Hashemite Arab leader who was the Sharif and Emir of Mecca from 1908. And after proclaiming the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire, he was the king of the Hijaz from 1916 to 1924. Now what's important about this man is that he, being a Hashemite, or the leader of the Hashemites, he's actually a descendant from Prophet Muhammad himself.
Yeah.
And so because him being descendant from Prophet Muhammad, people are like, well, he's related to Prophet Muhammad, so he should be a leader, right? So the British understand that this man is a perfect person that they would need to prop up so that they can get rid of the Ottomans by having him, supporting him, so he can raise up against the Ottomans. And so it says, because of his high standing and his links to Arab nationalism and his previous disputes with the central government, the British saw him as a potential ally once the war began. So the British are like, he is the perfect person that if we can give him the flip, he can take down the whole empire. Because why? He's Arab, right? He's highborn. We see that he has issues with the Turks already. So they're like, he'll be easy to flip. So what they do, in 1915 to 1916, this is where we come to the McMahon-Hussein correspondence. And this is a series of letters exchanged during World War I in which the British government agreed to recognize Arab independence after the war in exchange for the Sharif of Mecca launching an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. So this is the British saying, if you help us, you fight, help us fight the Ottomans, we'll recognize you as the leader of the Arabs, right? So he's an Arab that doesn't like the Turkish overlords. So he's like, yeah, I can do that. Well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
But that's going against
These are Muslims fighting against other Muslims. But he's supposed to be descended from Prophet Muhammad, so he's supposed to be, the rightful, righteous leader. But he's no better than the people that he's trying to overthrow, because he will even work with the infidel or the enemy, right, to fight another Muslim.
Yeah.
Muslims?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's where it started at.
Come on now. So, but they've been fighting for a long time. They've been fighting for this. This is just finally somebody that had interest in and said, like, I'm gonna take advantage of this fight. They had been fighting for a long time.
1915.
All of those leaders,
19,
Arab leaders in the Middle East, were puppets of Britain, and Britain installed them using the same plan.
Yeah.
And so it says, the correspondence comprised of 10 letters exchanged from July 1915 to March 1916 between Hussein bin Ali, Ibn. I got this from different sources. And again, I didn't write this. I got this from the History Channel website. I got this from the Encyclopedia Britannica, and very sparingly from Wikipedia, just to fill in some certain blanks. So this is what they have on, just out in the open on the internet. But you just need to be able to, follow the path of causality and really see the intent. And so it says, the Sharif of Mecca and Lieutenant Colonel Sir Henry McMahon, British High Commissioner of Egypt. So let me read this. It says, in October 24th, check this out. It says, subject to the above modifications, Great Britain is prepared to recognize and support the independence of the Arabs in all the regions within the limits demanded by the Sharif of Mecca. Great Britain will guarantee the holy places against all external aggression and will recognize their inviolability. 3. When the situation admits, Great Britain will give to the Arabs her advice and will assist them to establish what may appear to be the most suitable forms of government in those various territories. I am convinced that this declaration will ensure you, beyond all possible doubt, of sympathy of Great Britain towards the aspirations of her friends, the Arabs, and will result in a firm and lasting alliance, the immediate result of which will be the expulsion of the Turks from the Arab countries and freeing the Arab peoples from the Turkish yoke, which for so many years have passed heavily upon them. And that's A.H. McMahon at the bottom. And so, if you notice anything about this letter, it said a whole lot of nothing. Check this out. It says, and especially this is what's so vile, and that's the thing about them, is whenever they promise you something, there's always something up under this. Right here on 3, it says, when the situation admits, which is at Great Britain's discretion, Great Britain will give to the Arabs her advice and assist them to establish what may appear to be the most suitable forms of government in those various situations. So really, not only are you saying, if you help me, I will recognize you, but you're saying that I will recognize you as the leader, but at the end of the day, when I tell you what to do, you're going to do what I say. So I'll make you the leader in name, but you still have to answer me.
Yeah.
So that's really a loaded, a stealth, you know, promise, but really in the promise of recognition for the lands and what you think you're receiving, they're saying you can be the face of it, but when I have something to tell you, you answer to me. So I'm really, he just agreed to be a British proxy and not a true Arab leader. So he has an issue with the Turkish, so he's selling out the Turkish so he can become, you know, under the British. So he's selling out one empire for another one.
Yeah.
And in this case, he sold out his Muslim brothers for the European.
And so
Yes, ma'am.
like Allah rule a law as the controlling law.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But Sister Deborah did Brother Thomas.
Well, you know, my thought was, what did they have to gain? What did the Sharif of Mecca have to gain in making that deal?
Bam, you are on it. Is that a question or you want to keep going?
Well, just had a little bit more to go. But whatever the deal was, he knew that it was going to make them a target against, well, by the Muslim world, the Islamic world.
Right.
So, but he exchanged for whatever he wanted, whatever he felt like he got, he exchanged it for the protection against the Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually made the agreement to be protected against the Muslims, because whatever they were getting was going to be something that was going to be, you know,
Absolutely.
against Islam or against the Muslim world.
Absolutely. And there you go. So he knew full and well that he was doing something wrong. He's not being tricked. He's not being fooled. He knew full and well what he was getting himself into. And so this is a man that's descended from the prophet. He was already, you know, the Sharif of Mecca, that's like a title where you're like the steward of the Holy Lands. You know, you upkeep it and you keep it safe and things like that. So Mecca and Medina, well, I'm saying Mecca, I don't know specifically about Medina, but Mecca was under his control.
No, Medina was not. It was under the Ottoman.
Yeah, but Mecca was that's why he's the Sharif of Mecca, but we're gonna get to the Medina part later. So he is the steward of the holy city of Mecca, but that's not enough for him. He's just like every other power in this war. People saw this war as a chance for their ambitions. So while there's people who, you know, the forces they got into this war for none other than they see a bunch of people fighting, and so they're like, ooh, while they're fighting, I'm gonna go over here and try to get something while they're busy over there. So it's like, okay, these people then left their home to go fight, so while they're going away fighting in another land, I'm just gonna swoop in and take their land. There was a lot of that going on. And so he was good. He had no reason to enter that war other than his own ambitions. And he dressed it up as Arab independence, right? But then look who he made a deal with. He made a deal with an enemy or an infidel over his Muslim brothers.
Yeah, he probably just adopted that name.
Yeah.
So
Probably was Jew.
no, this is actually the descendants, but it was really just his ambitions, because again, like I said, at that time, and that's why the minister says, what are the 4 great impediments? Nationalism, racism, sexism, and materialism. And again, at that time, what does it say? It says that because of his high standing and his links to what? Arab nationalism.
Nationalism.
Well, I want to make a point.
Yeah,
But he wasn't the only one accused of nationalism, because there was a lot of that going on at that
I
time.
have 2 or 3 points to bring up. As far as nationalism is, Arab nationalism go, Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, he spoke about that and how he was against that and how that was something that the Arabs shouldn't do. And it's also in the Quran about Arab nationalism. In Islam, there's supposed to be no such thing as nationalism. There's only Islam. Another old word that they use in this history, in studying it, you use the word materialism, but the word was booty in terms of the money, the spoils of war, money, women. There were, from the time of the prophet, there were people who fought strictly for that. And the prophet knew that. But the prophet thought that by allowing these people to fight, and the prophet himself many times had to pay these people the spoils of war, because that's what a lot of people had got into the war for. Because they were after the money or the spoils of the war. But they used that word booty a lot back then, and that's exactly what it was. It was the spoils of war that people got into. Another point is, we were always taught that you can't follow, in Islam, we don't follow Arabs, simply because they got the book, but they don't understand it. And they skip through, and as the Quran would say, you believe only portions that you want to believe, and you forget a lot of other stuff. So these people are very, very confused when it comes to the book, and they don't even use it. Because if they were using the book, the Quran, a lot of these things they were doing with the Europeans, they wouldn't have done. And it always caused a problem with them, because on one hand you got people who follow in the book, and on the other hand you got people who don't. There was a lot of murdering and killing during this time, simply because a lot of these phony fake leaders, you know, they knew their time was short. This guy, you know, it could have been a materialism thing that he was all into these positions for. Because there's very few of them that really rule from the point of Islam. A lot of them, like I said, we call them the word puppet, because somebody else tells you what to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm gonna add, before I say a few systems, and then also, we're gonna get into this as we go, but again, he went from Sharif and Emir of Mecca to king of the Hijaz. So he went from Sharif to a king. And we're gonna see, again, what this transition, because we think that these titles have no meaning, but they're really interesting when you really break them down and see what that meant. Sister Deborah?
I want to go back to what Brother Malik said. Now, Hussein Ibn Ali, no, Hashim, he said that he was Arab.
He's descended from what I researched, the Hashemites are descendants of like Prophet Muhammad's grandfather.
Okay.
That
believe
was,
grandfather, but
Imam, Amina of family there. That's the Hakim.
That's where the Assassins come from.
Because Muhammad's father
not
came
Hashim, not Hashim.
came from the what the family that was real known in the family of the prophet.
Who? You asking me?
Yeah.
Well, you are a Quran expert. You are you brother Thomas. He's trying to find a family that was
The
really
family
prominent
tree
in the prophet.
of Muhammad.
The Quraysh.
Talking about the
Correct.
tribe. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He came from the Quraysh tribe.
Yeah.
His mother came from that family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. So again, because of his high standing, so he comes from a family. You're right. You see what I'm saying? So does family have any? Just because you're born to a family, does that make you a qualified leader?
No.
No.
I wasn't finished.
Okay.
That does, the Saxons does come from that, not Hashim.
It comes from Hashashim, but not
But they
Hashim.
thought that they were
Hashim.
saying, they thought they were saying, assassin.
Right.
So you're saying
So there's many that hold.
But let me finish my
It's
point.
debatable.
My point was that, that you have, what Mel said about maybe he was a Jew. Now, I say this because I don't want us to lose sight that this whole 1914 date, or this time period, was based upon the fact that the Jews had a plan for world domination, and that 1914 date was a trigger point. During the time of the Ottoman Empire, when the Jews were coming under persecution, they either had to choose because they had to hide. They either had to choose to become Christians or they chose to become Muslims. Well, I'm not gonna say they chose to become Muslims, but they chose to hide under the title of Muslim. So a lot of those people that, you know, that got into positions of authority in different places, even down in South America, they may have a Muslim first name and a Jewish last name. These people, like the minister said, they're nomadic. They're hiding in all these families.
Now, I can definitely show you some Hermetic. Now, I can show you what they call crypto Jews or crypto Muslims, whatever they call them, these people that are faking under the title.
Well, in the Ottoman Empire, they were called domas. That means converts. And so they actually still were Zionists that came under the title of Muslim. So
Right.
what I'm saying is that he made this agreement, which really was opening the door to the Western power, opening the door to, you know, I'll say it was not the Jews per se, but the Gentiles, but the Jews and the Gentiles, when you start unraveling that, they're brothers of one another. As Moses, like Muhammad said. So
Talks
I'm
about
just saying,
the 12 tribes of Judah.
of Judah.
So there's that even goes into something that I'm not prepared to get to today, but
All I'm suggesting is that we can't discount that there are people that have gotten into high positions in Islam that are actually Zionists.
oh, I believe that. I mean, I'm not discounting that, but to my research, what I've done, he's legitimately descended from this family. But I'm from what my research is that he not saying that I'm not discounting, but he didn't get into it because of Zionism. He truly was, you know, an Arab nationalist to the point that he wanted to achieve his ends, you know, no matter what. Because in his mind, I'm better than, like the minister talked about, this that's the mind of Yahoo. I'm better.
But
And
it's
so,
the same mind as the Zionists.
right, and so, but do I think he was a, you know, card-carrying member of Zionism? And do I think that if he was in charge, he would, you know, but what I'm saying is how he became maybe a member of this Zionist plot is that he did not follow his book. If he was just opened up the Quran, he would have found the answer to whether he should or not. And so, either willingly or unwillingly, he became a Zionist. If you know, as probably at some point we all have, you know, dibble and dabble in the Zionist affairs. But again, they were trying to. Their whole goal was to attack the weakest part of this alliance, which was the Ottoman Empire, and they did it. They first tried it on the battlefield, and they lost, so now they're coming back at it, and now they're trying diplomacy and subversion. And so they did it by going within the empire and playing off the dissatisfaction, again, that natural dissatisfaction that exists within every organization, every governmental structure. There's always people who are not going to agree with who's in charge and not like it. Not saying that the Ottomans were not, you know, accused of, you know, some of the things they were accused of, people didn't like them. But I'm just saying, as a principle, if they would have just followed this, you know, they would saw assistance and patience and prayer. And I mean, you can go on and on and on and on and on and on about many things they could have done, but they didn't. So, moving on.
It
And
would
so,
be
because,
hard pressed for me to think that the Ottoman Empire would strictly,
right,
strictly
because again, the backdrop to this, why it was so easy to flip him, is because, like I said, right before World War I, in around 1911, the Ottoman Empire had gone under a form of modernization and secularization. They were trying to change. There was this revolution called the Young Turk Revolution, where these young military and academics, were trying to modernize the Turkish society. So they didn't want a monarch. They wanted a central government like Europe had, like the Europeans had. And this is why when she was talking about some of these crypto Jews, and it's my high suspicion that they were involved in that. But because of that revolution, a lot of the hardcore Muslims were like, I don't like it, right? Because there was Muslims that said that you shouldn't have technology past the 7th century. If it didn't exist in Prophet Muhammad's time, it's haram. No cars. You should only ride camels. No toothbrushes. No deodorant. Those people did not like the change of the government and the culture of the empire. So they're like, you're not just head of the empire, you are the what? You are the Khalifa. So if you're the Khalifa, you're supposed to be Muslim. And so because you're not that, right? And then on top of that, you're a Turk. You're not even an Arab. You're not the same people as Prophet Muhammad. So we don't like you being in charge. So that was already brewing before the war started. Like I said, this war allowed people the opportunities to move out on some of the ambitions that they already had.
It would be, then and now, it would be hard to categorize Turkey as a Muslim country, because out of all the Arab countries around, they're the most secular or closest to the...
But they're not Arabs.
Huh?
They're not Arabs. The Turks are not Arabs.
Yeah, but I'm just saying
They don't
that,
speak Arabic.
no,
They're not Arab descent. They don't come from the same lands. They don't originate from the lands of the Arabs. You see what I'm saying?
no, and but what's unique about the country is that it's so blended with so many different cultures and
Right.
people that it's more of like a republic.
But it is now.
Yeah.
That's
well,
what we talked about at the last week. We talked about how we went from being, an empire to a republic, and it was a secular republic. So it was just like any other country in Europe, probably with the exception that they had a different decor.
Right.
So yes, so this is what's going on. This is the backdrop to all this. And now can we see how this plays out today? Oh, this person is the Honorable Louis Farrakhan's descendant. This is the Honorable Louis Farrakhan's descendant. So therefore they should be right. Or there's a group that's outside of Chicago that don't like the people in Chicago and how they move, right? We think that we should be practicing, like the minister said, pure Islam. And the leadership is not practicing pure Islam, so we need to depose them. And so now, then you have an outside group, that offers you financial support to take out headquarters. And because you believe you're better than the people that are in headquarters, or even in your local mosque, you're going to take support from somebody outside against your brother or your sister.
Well, the Caucasian and the devil has always had a very powerful weapon when it comes to money. I mean, that's how they destroyed the civil rights movement, because they went to Jesse Jackson and different people and they offered them money to go a particular way. And that's always a problem. Money, because people will take the money and mislead you and sell you out.
Exactly, and especially when the people who offer you the money are the same people who orchestrated your poverty. You see what I'm saying? So they're the reason why you're poor.
Right.
And then they're the ones who want to offer you money. It's like, why couldn't you offer me money before I was destitute? You see what I'm saying? Because I wanted to break your back, right? I wanted to bend you. I wanted to weaken your legs so you can bend. Now you're willing. So very complex. That's why I tried to streamline it into just looking at least for today, looking at how the disruption of the Ottoman Empire played into the overall war, and also how the Muslim world looks today, and this whole idea of Muslims are the enemies, right? And it all has to do with the Jewish state of Israel. So, now, because of this correspondence, these over 10 letters, now the Sharif of Mecca has agreed, finally after exchanging 10 letters, over a year, he finally agreed to the British, because, again, this is just one of the letters, but, in going back and forth, the Sharif of Mecca didn't immediately take the offer, because the thing about it is that the Sharif of Mecca wanted to be known as the king of the Arabs. This is what he wanted, because he wanted to establish a Muslim state that was independent of the Turks. And what he wanted is to control all of the Arab lands, okay? He wanted all of the Arab lands. And all of the Arab lands includes not just, what's in the Arabian Peninsula, but this includes like Iraq, all these places. So this is what he thinks. So after going back and forth, and he finally agreed in his mind, once he does what the British wants, he's going to be control over all the Arab lands, not just a little small part. Yes, sir.
I have a very good question that some students probably haven't thought about or wouldn't ask. But ethnically, what is an Arab? Now, from what the crackers say, the white man said they're saying niggas. So that's one of his definitions. And the white man or the cracker looks very down on what you call a so-called Arab. And I think sometimes if you ask some people what is an Arab or what constitutes Arab, they don't know.
Well,
what ethnically, where did these people come from?
That Arabs, they trace their lineage to the language. And so it's kind of like the people who originally were Arab speakers. And so like we said, and then we know that the original Arabic speakers were black people. But then we also know with the history of Yaqub and these people, they went back into the Holy Lands and began to intermix with them. Right? That's when racial mixing first started. Racial mixing first started in the Holy Land.
Now they have some books on the subject.
Oh, okay, but before we get off to the books on the subject, let's try to stay on track.
But it's also important that when you're talking about people,
right,
to know what the people are.
Right.
And
that's a part of
originally, those people in that area, as you just stated, were black. That diluting of that black came from Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great visited that area.
It started before him.
Because that area was really nothing. I mean, it's desert. They were, for the British, for anybody else, there was no interest at one time in that because there was nothing there.
Yeah, the parts of the land that they wanted to have, because the parts of the land that they already knew they had oil in, they had already secured it, so they didn't care about what
But I'm just saying, way before they knew about the oil, there was really nothing in it, in that land. It wasn't like we going to Africa or somewhere. They got these animals and minerals and this and that and the other. That land was nothing.
Right.
Now, what made it something was the oil.
Mm-hmm. And even before the oil, it was the land. But here we go. So now, these correspondence between Sharif Hussein and McMahon led to the Arab Revolt. So now, here they are, Sharif and his men are here to collect on their promise. So the Arab Revolt was a military uprising of Arab forces against the Ottoman in the Middle Eastern theater of war. On the basis of McMahon-Hussein correspondence, an agreement between the British government and Hussein ibn Ali, Sharif of Mecca, the revolt officially initiated at Mecca on June 10, 1916. The aim of the revolt was to create a single, unified, independent Arab state stretching from Aleppo in Syria all the way down to Aden in British had promised to recognize. The Sharif, the Sharifan army, led by Hussein and the Hashemites, with the military backing of the British Empire and the British Egyptian Expeditionary Force, successfully battled and repelled the Ottoman military presence from much of the Hijaz and Transjordan. Now, we have some interesting things that you need to know. Where is Syria? Where is Yemen? Can anybody say it off the top of their head?
What do you mean, where's Syria?
On the map.
I know it's on the border, with,
Se-
Lebanon, and it's right underneath, Turkey.
Okay. Here we go. Bam. So now, here's the map. And so, what that agreement meant, that they said from Syria, which is up here, all the way down to Yemen. So they saying that off this agreement, they want all this land, right? All that Arab lands, right? Excuse me, oh, that's in my eye. So they said again, here we go. Let's go back some. So it said from Aleppo in Syria to Aden in Yemen, right? And it said down here it said that they successfully repelled the Ottoman presence from much of Hijaz and Transjordan. So let's find Syria, which is up here. Yemen is down here. This is the Hijaz, if you want to know what this is, and here is Transjordan. So what Sharif Hussein wanted out of this agreement is he wanted like all of this, because this all this area right here was for the British. So they couldn't have like the parts that belong to the British already. So they wanted everything in that area that didn't belong to the British already, because they're making an agreement with the British. So they're like, okay, we don't want the lands that you have, but everything that you have, basically, I'm making it simple, but everything that you don't already own, we want it.
And if you flash forward to today, those two countries,
Right,
they are talking about and warning them right as we speak.
right.
President Trump is taking out the troops in Syria, and they are warring in Yemen because Yemen is supposed to be a hot seat of ISIS and
Right. So look at this. This is a map. This is, like I said, this map shows you what the British control. So the British control all this down here, all this on this coast. This is all Ottoman. So basically what the Sharif said, he wants all this. He wants all this area.
but it's funny how nothing has changed.
It has changed. We're going to get to that. But
They still there fighting.
yeah, as far as
That's
fighting,
what I mean,
yes.
yeah.
But this is why they're fighting. And then that's what I'm trying to show you. This is why they're fighting. But because we don't know history, we can just accept the notion that Muslims are evil and they're a bunch of terrorists. And we just think that the Muslims just don't like Christians. They were here doing business with the Christians, the so-called Christian nations, right? So they liked them just fine. It was because of they reneged on the deal that they made, and they did not forget. And so when you clear up all this stuff that happened at this time, you can really see what the wars and the skirmishes and the violence that's going on is really all about.
Right.
So now it led this revolt, and now that they won, so they couldn't win the war just going displacing the Europeans. Now what they did is, we're going to flip people who are on the inside and have sway over the people and get them to fight against the Ottomans from the inside. And now they've won. Why? Because these people know the land, they use the territory, they have an advantage. And then also, these people, these are Muslims, they believe they're fighting, for Islam, they're fighting for practice. So when when you fighting in your mind that you're fighting for Allah, you're going to fight 10 times harder. And so that was one of the people that they pulled to take down the Ottoman Empire. And now here is another one. You talking about the sand niggas? Right?
Right. One and the same.
Example, this man is blacker than me.
Yeah.
And so, even more pictures, and then he has under that thing, he has plaques all the way down to his knees.
And because he was put in that position by the British, the first thing he did was line up all of his enemies and cut their heads off.
Right, we're going to get to this.
Okay.
So the next person, again, attacking the Ottoman Empire from the inside. Now, we have Abdul Aziz ibn Saud. Interesting name, Saud, you know, right? Because on the early maps, we saw that there was no Saudi Arabia. How did we get that? Here we go. And so now, here's this man. Abdul Aziz ibn Saud was a tribal and Muslim religious leader who formed the modern state of Saudi Arabia and initiated the exploitation of its oil. During World War I, Ibn Saud entered into a treaty with the British December 1915, accepting protectorate status and agreeing to make war against Ibn Rashid, who was being supported by the Turks. So now, without getting too, because again, there was a lot of fighting that was going on in between, but at this point, Ibn Saud had already been fighting and conquering to take back his ancestral lands. So he had already been on a path of defeating, fighting and defeating other Arab leaders, in Arabia. And so now he has his eyes set on another conquest, and so now what he wants is the British backing so he can continue his conquest. So now, in 1915, he accepts an agreement with the British to fight against the Turks, right? Go back. When did this start? No, 1915, I'm sorry. 1915 is when Sharif Hussein started doing business, right, making treaties with the British. And at the same time, they were courting another Arab leader doing business with the British at the same time. So the British has already made promises to the Russians, they've made promises to the French, and now they're making promises to the Arabs, right? And it's only 1915. And so in 1915, that brings us to the Treaty of Dar. This treaty made the lands of the House of Saud a British protectorate and attempts to define its boundaries. The British aim of the treaty was to guarantee the sovereignty of Kuwait, Qatar, and the Trucial states. Abdul Aziz agreed not to attack the British protectorates. Also, he agreed to enter the war against the Ottoman Empire in the Middle Eastern theater of war. So again, on the map, the British, this is the Trucial states, this is Qatar, this is Kuwait. These are already British protectorates. So Abdul Saud, Ibn Saud, he's already conquering, on his way conquering this land. He's making his way up here. And so now he becomes a British protectorate and he agrees with the British, I won't attack, your interests that are surrounding my area, right? And then also I agree to fight against the Turks. But really, he was more so fighting against his own enemies who were aligned with the Turks because he's trying to take back his ancestral lands. But at the same time, we're going to lead to this. Did I cover that already? With Abdul. Okay. So this is what's going on in 1915. So he's made a treaty with the British as well.
I just wanted to interject a point. Coming, like from my president, Donald Trump, he said the biggest mistake they made was they didn't take the oil. Bush said the same thing, and there is a point that if these crackers would have did what they supposedly had done, which would took the oil, they wouldn't have had so much problem in that Middle Eastern area, because really that's what they were there for. What they did was, instead of taking the oil, they agreed to refine the oil because they had the refinery.
Yeah, but that was later on after, this was later on, a little bit later on. We'll get to that because we eventually going to get to that because that's important. But still, we have to start with this. And so the point that I wanted to make is that, look, so from 1908 into 1916 or 1915, the Sharif of Mecca, he was known as the Sharif of Mecca. Hussein, right, he was known as the Sharif of Mecca, but 1916 to 1924, he became king of the Hijaz, okay? So the thing is, the point that I'm trying to make is that after he made the deal with the British, he was no longer the king of, the Emir of Mecca. Now he says he's the, what? Now I'm the king of the Hijaz, which includes Mecca, Jeddah, Medina. But this is what the Allies officially recognized him as, is the king of the Hijaz, but in his mind, he wanted to be the king of all the Arab lands. And so now we're starting to have conflict, because now you already are showing signs of reneging on what I promised. And the reason why the British were not so keen to just give him everything he wanted, because a part of the lands includes Palestine, which is where they have their sights set on for the state of Israel. See that?
Yes, and then when he gets the name of king, or the title of king, the Islamic world knows that the Prophet said there are no kings in Islam, and the other part of it is that, I forgot, but I know that there are kings in Islam, and I know that would be an issue. I'm trying to think. It has something to do with the British and their acknowledging him as a king over a kingdom, and that goes against, like I said, Islam itself. Oh, what I want to say is that they do away with, because one of the parts of the agreement when Hashim, when he became the king of Hijaz, it was that he had to get rid of the title Khalifa and never to take it on.
But that's the thing about all this exactly. The Allies they did not want a unified Muslim land, because again, this is why we're why. Because what happened in 1916? They had already carved up the Ottoman territory. What's special about this thing, did you see this little area in yellow? They had already carved the area in yellow out as an international territory, so that couldn't be controlled by anyone. So I believe like the different colors represent in this area A and this area B, these represent the different areas that they carved out for the different powers. I don't have the ledger, but it's like one area is for the British and the other area is for the French. But if you can see, this little area in yellow is Palestine. But you want to know something about Palestine and why that's interesting and why I'm saying this? Is the dates. This Sykes-Picot Agreement was in 1916, but the Balfour Declaration wasn't into what? 1917. So even though the Balfour Declaration had been written in 1917 and signed in 1917, all the way in 1916, they had already carved it out as a state that was going to be an international state. So obviously there was already plans behind the scenes for Israel before they even reached out to Lionel the Rothschild officially on paper, right? So that's where you have to pay attention to the dates. That's why I put the dates up there. Okay? And so, yes, so we have these two Arab leaders, both religious leaders, right? He's coming with the backing of, Prophet Muhammad. I'm coming from, descended from him. I'm the Emir of Mecca. And then you also have Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, who is from the Wahhabi movement, right? And they are Muslim, purists, at least in they profess it, right? And so you have these two men that are being reached out to the British government at the same time, right? So again, we have all these agreements that have been officially signed on certain dates, but the dates show that they already had their plans in motion before they got down and wrote it on paper. So the Balfour Declaration declaration to revisit again is 1917, on November 2nd, 1917, Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour writes an important letter to Britain's most illustrious Jewish citizen, Baron Lionel Walter Rothschild, expressing the British government's support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The letter would eventually become known as the Balfour Declaration. We read over here when it starts off, Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. So on and so forth. So now the British promise Russia some Ottoman land. They promise who else? France some Ottoman land in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. They promise Sharif Hussein, Arab state, and they didn't necessarily promise the South, but they promised the South the land that belongs to them, that they included in their territory. They would, acknowledge it and be allies. So now you have promises going on, and now you introduce a promise to the Jews for their land, which resides inside of the Ottoman Empire, right? So now you got promises here, and eventually this is going to catch up because some of these promises to people overlap. Okay? Yes, sir?
It's also interesting to note that even though you're looking at this little area over there in the Middle East, whereby Britain and the crackers are kind of dominating, in reality, they got their hands all over the world. They're not just there, they're in a lot of different countries. Just a sidebar, they're in India. They're growing heroin and opium, and they're selling it to China. They're doing all kinds of things. Everything is conquest of money and goods, because again, these people coming out the caves of Europe and stuff, they had nothing. Their little country is barren. They don't have they can't grow food, nothing. So they began with going out and conquering and robbing and stealing and murdering and raping. And that includes France and Germany and Russia. They all were doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to dominate the world.
Right.
And that's how Britain became rich. That's how Germany became rich.
Absolutely. But what we assume by now is that these places might seem like different interests, on its face, but in reality, it's one common interest that's just playing out as political, global economic theater, right? Because if anybody knew what was going on in reality, they would what? Rise up. And that's the thing, is that, these Arabs, they knew what was going on, and because they knew what was going on, eventually they rose up. And once somebody knows the truth, you can't do anything. So now, Balfour Declaration is written in 1917, and in 1918, World War I ends. After the British and the Allies had been losing up until about 1917, then this declaration is written. Now everything's worked out for them. But at the same time that was going on, they were courting Arabs to rise up against the Ottoman Empire. So now, in 1919, we have the Paris Peace Conference. So it says, after the war, the Paris Peace Conference imposed a series of peace treaties on the Central Powers, officially ending the war. Hussein, who is represented at the Paris Peace Conference by his third son, Faisal, who's here, this man right here. Yeah, Faisal Faisal. But he refused to ratify the Versailles Peace Treaty in 1919 as a protest against the mandatory regimes imposed on Syria, Palestine, and Iraq by France and Great Britain. Stop. Hold up. Sharif Hussein entered into a treaty, not a treaty, but entered in, based on the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, the British promised them, although vaguely, right, their own land, which included all of the Arab lands, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the war, the Ottoman Empire lost, but before they made that deal with them, they made a deal with who? France Because the Sykes-Picot Agreement had already carved up land that he thought that was going to be his. But now the war is over and the Allied powers have won, and the British has to prioritize whose agreements and promises are they going to come through.
Yeah.
That's right. So double dealing and reneging. Okay? It's all going on. So Sharif Hussein found out about this because the Balfour Declaration, it was like a public thing. This was like, at the time, they had, I believe, don't want to get it wrong, but these secret agreements had ended up being published and it came out. And so he knew after the war was over, now he finds out that he's promised the Jews land in his Arab state. Right? So now he's hot. And now at the peace conference, they're like, you on the winning side, you on the Allied side, so you need to, agree, sign the treaties that we've agreed. And they're like, he's like, no, because you promised me my land. And now you're telling me that I can't have my lands that you promised. So he's like, I'm not signing that agreement. I'm not signing it. And it says, so subsequently, his domestic policy was marked by ever-increasing avarice and conservatism, while he sowed the seeds of future trouble by deliberately courting the enmity of Ibn Saud. Now, so basically, when this peace conference comes out, and now everything's out in the open, that I've made agreements that trumped your agreements, basically, he could have, in essence, he got more than he started off with at the war, but he was like, no, I want it all. Right? And so since he was like either all or nothing, basically now they have to find a way to get rid of him because he's not going along with the plan. And that's where this conflict comes with Ibn Saud.
Who is that black brother?
That is a slave. I believe he's Faisal's son. Slave. This is at the peace conference, and this white man right here was one of the British spies that was sent in to help the Arabs win against the Ottoman Empire. That's in my eyes. So he was actually sent in by the British government to assist the Arabs against fighting against the Ottomans. But yeah, he's a slave.
Islam, eradicates slavery.
But we established that these people don't follow Islam.
The Arabs were about the last people to get out of the slave trade. And the Arabs got out of the slave trade somewhere around in the 60s.
Where they was
1960.
violating
They were
I
violating
told you
all
the people corrupt. I told you they got the book, but they don't
They
believe
were
it.
violating way more than that, so
Huh?
we passed that up.
And incidentally, with the slave trade too, the white man knew that it was easier to get the Arabs to go into Africa and capture slaves, because the Arabs had been doing it. They had been going back and forth into Africa, taking slaves and speaking the language. So that's another illustration that how the people have the book, but they don't.
Right,
They don't read it.
but who has the book now? Everybody has the book, really, but I mean,
Right.
anybody has the book now, but we have the book too.
Right.
So we can talk about them all day, but what are we gonna do when the same situation comes upon us, which it is coming? Because the minister said that while they were planning the war on Islam in the East, they were also planning the war on Islam, the Nation of Islam, in North America, and they used the same tactics.
Also, Prophet Muhammad was one of the few prophets that spoke about slavery, that instituted a lot of things against slavery. For instance, Prophet Muhammad said, you got to feed your slave what you eat. You got to clothe your slave what you clothe. In other words, to a lot of people, it's better to let you go than to feed you what I eat and put, kind of clothes. A lot of Africans became Muslims and stuff because they knew the Quran said you can't enslave your own brother. So that, I'm just saying that Prophet Muhammad did speak against it and about it, and that eradicating slavery, elevating women, You know, because the Arabs used to bury women in the sand and all that. Prophet Muhammad
Yeah.
stopped all that, you know. But again, the Arabs are so backwards and ignorant, and as you can see, they play games with the book. They don't believe
But
it.
but this is already done. So I'm not bringing this up to continue to bash them, but I'm bringing this up to what do we do when we know that this is coming to us. Because the same can be said about us that can be said about them. All right? So we don't want to repeat, right?
And I'm not
What
bashing them, I'm just trying to show a brother that these people are not qualified to lead you, in the sense that they don't know their own self. They don't know the book themselves.
Well, honestly, there's only one man that's really truly qualified to lead anybody anywhere today.
That's right.
So, and so that's that man right there. So, because of this double dealing, find out when he comes out and watch the double deal, he denied it. He's not going to sign the peace conference. So now he's having some issues with them. So, what was the treaty that did this? And so, part of these series of treaties that happened at the peace conference was the Treaty of, I cannot pronounce it. Well, this treaty was in 1920, and it was one of the treaties that the Central Powers signed towards the Allied powers after their defeat in World War I. This treaty marked the beginning of the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire and its dismemberment. The terms it stipulated included the renunciation of all non-Turkish territory and its cession to the Allied administrators. So again, now that the Ottomans have lost, these are the Ottomans. This is the treaty that carved up their empire and gave it to whom. And a part of the agreements that were already made, like the Sykes-Picot agreement, right, and the agreements and the treaties that were made to the Arabs, and all the different people that were made agreements, it was a part of this treaty, right? And so they don't like it. And so now, the terms of the treaty, now let's go back to the Ottoman Empire. What's going there, right? Now it says the terms of the treaty stirred hostility and nationalist feeling amongst the Turks, because the Turks lost, right? They lost. But still, they feel like they don't like what is going on to their lands. And specifically, I think that the Russians, again, at the beginning of the war, all the way back when, the British made a promise to the Russians for Constantinople. Right? The British made a promise to the Russians for Constantinople. And so it was because of Constantinople was a part of that treaty that the Turkish was going to lose. They didn't want to lose that capital city of Constantinople, and that's really what sent them off. Because even though they lost the war, they like, you can cut up our lands, be good with that, but you can't take that part, And so that's what led to the Turkish uprising. And this is after the peace conference. Again, this is supposed to be a peace conference, but it seems like the only result of this peace conference is what? More war. The unfair deals you're making with are creating the pretense for the next war. And so it says the signatories of the treaty were stripped of their citizenship by the Grand National Assembly, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, which is this man. Now, this is going back to those crypto Jews. This is a Turk. This is what a Turkish man looks like. When you have that full color, this man has blue eyes and blonde hair and white skin.
That's right.
And I mean, he looks whiter than George Bush.
That's right.
And this man was actually, and what was a part of the reason why the people backed him in his movements, because he participated in the Gallipoli campaign, and so he was like a war hero. And so, because of his status in the war, from what I've researched, is that the British basically, they knew what was happening, the imposing these unfair treatments that people was going to uprise, so they kind of picked somebody for the people to look up to. So he was kind of like a manufacturer leader. They're like, okay, if we need to pick somebody who's going to answer to us, right? He has to be somebody that the people believe in, just like who? Just like Sharif Hussein. If we're gonna pick a proxy, he needs to be that somebody that's willing to listen to us, but at the same time the people like. Same thing with Ibn Saud. And so this man was somebody that they knew that the people would back because he was a war hero. Why would you back him? And it says, in that war, Ataturk led the Turkish nationalists to defeat the combined armies of the signatories of the treaty, including the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. So this man was the one that was responsible, sealed up the deal to the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. And so it says the Sultanate was abolished in 1922, and in a new treaty, the Treaty of Lausanne, the Republic of Turkey was established in its place in 1923, and 1 year later, the Caliphate was abolished in 1924. So again, on his face, it's like, oh, this is a military leader, right? Who all the people back were going to believe him, but what did he do? He gave up the empire for a republic or a Turkish state, Turkish nationalism. That means forget all the other Muslims, forget the Arabs, forget all them. We only worried about Turkish people, right? And then he gave up the Caliphate. No more that Muslim stuff. We're completely secular. You don't have to worry about us uprising against you now. We got our land, we got our territory. We're not going to do none of that Muslim stuff. We're not going to try to, go against the mandates of the Allied powers. So that's what happened in Turkey. So now the empire is abolished. But guess what? You still have these two out there. What are we going to do with them, right? So we remember that Sharif Hussein didn't get what he bargained for in the deal, so now he's mad with them. He's against them. They have to figure out a way to tie up these loose ends. So now, these two come into issue with each other. Again, Muslim versus Muslim. They got both of y'all to take out one Muslim. Now y'all both Muslims fighting each other. So it says Sharif Hussein's son Abdullah had become ruler of Transjordan in 1921, and another son, Faisal, who we showed, was the king of Iraq. And Ibn Saud, fearing the encirclement by his rival dynasty, decided to invade the Hijaz. All right? And so again, going back to our map. So this is, Saud has this area, Transjordan is up here, and Iraq is here. So he's like, this is Sharif Hussein's sons, but Sharif Hussein controls this area. So now, basically up here are other Arabs, and these are just the Europeans. And Sharif Hussein already, and not Sharif Hussein, Ibn Saud, he had already agreed not to attack the British, right? So who else does he have to attack? The other Arabs. And so, I forgot to put this up there, but in 1924, Sharif Hussein, again, because he got cheated on a deal, he wanted to fight back against the Allied powers by trying to reestablish the Caliphate now. So now in 1924, he's like, y'all give me what I want, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to rouse the Muslims to fight with me against the Europeans now, because y'all reneged on y'all deal. But guess what? That was the perfect opportunity for them to come up with a reason for Ibn Saud to attack them. Because again, Ibn Saud and the Wahhabis, they are these very strict, radical Muslims, right? Supposedly. And so now you have this man is trying to claim that he is the rightful successor to Prophet Muhammad. And so we already know the back deals that he's been doing with Britain. He's done all this dirt. And so they're like, no, you don't qualify to be the Caliphate. So we're going to attack you in the name of religion. And so it says that, talking about Ibn Saud, it says he was at the height of his powers. His strong personality and extraordinary charm had won the devotion of all his subjects. A skillful politician, he worked closely with the religious leaders who always supported him, relying on the Ikhwan. And the Ikhwan are they're like these Muslim militants. These were like Muslim Arab fighters, but very, very religious Muslim Arab fighters. So relying on the Ikhwan to eliminate his Arab rivals, he sent them to raid his neighbors, but then he called the British, whose imperial interests were involved, that the raid was against his orders. So this is what he did. Both Sharif Hussein and Ibn Saud both were protectorates of the British. So both of them were allies of the British. And so in order for Ibn Saud not to renege on his treaty, because he promised the British he would not attack their protectorates. So what he does is that he sends his fighters to go fight Sharif Hussein, and then he hurries and makes the contacts the British and said that they not listening to me. So he sent them and then lied and said that I didn't tell them to do it. So now technically he hasn't broken his agreement. Okay? And so in 1924, the Ikhwan took Mecca, and the Hijaz was added to his dominions. So now he has basically everything. Now he's added the Hijaz to his dominions. Now he has all that. He is Mecca, he is Medina, he is all this man. I mean, this is some really shady stuff. So the Ikhwan was revolt. So at this point, after he had them, the Ikhwan to go take over the land, now he has the land. It says at this point there were no more rivals whom Ibn Saud could conquer, for the remaining had treaties with Britain. Because everything around that was just Britain. Britain had interest in all those other places. He had already signed a deal, a treaty, not at the Treaty of Darren, not to attack them. It says, but the Ikhwan had been taught that all non-Wahhabi Muslims were infidels. So when Ibn Saud forbade them from further raiding, they charged him with treachery, quoting his own words against him. And in 1927, they invaded Iraq against his wishes. Again, Iraq was another British protectorate. Even though the Hijaz and Sharif Hussein was a British protectorate, the British wanted them to attack each other because Hussein was trying to reestablish the Caliphate. So they got Saud to take him out because Saud answered to them. So now Saud took over all the Arab lands except what the British told him he can't take over. And so now the Ikhwan are like, we want more. Aren't we supposed to raid and da 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 da? We want all the Arab lands. We don't want to have the British tell us what we can and can't do. So they go off and attack on their own. And so it says they were repulsed by the British aircraft, but Ibn Saud's authority over them had vanished. And on March 29, 1929, the Ikhwan, I got this off the internet now, the fanatics whom he had trained himself were crushed by Ibn Saud himself at the Battle of Sibila.
I looked it up.
Okay. Oh, that other French word, Sib? This is another battle. So basically, Ibn Saud used these people who were very strict Muslims to go fight his wars. And then when he had made deals with the British and really was just using them, now they start to see that he isn't as religious as they are. Now he turns on them, and guess what? He has them killed as well. And so now, in 1927, we reached the Treaty of Jeddah. In 1927, the Treaty of Jeddah, formerly the treaty between His Majesty and His Majesty the King of the Hijaz and the Najd. Again, I showed you that map. The Hijaz and the Najd was the two green areas, all that in between. It says, and its dependencies was signed between the United Kingdom and Ibn Saud. It recognized the independence of Ibn Saud and sovereignty over what was then known as the Kingdom of Hijaz and Najd. The two regions were unified into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932, and in return, Ibn Saud agreed to stop his forces from attacking and harassing neighboring British protectorates. Okay, so you see how 1914, right? How we all the way to 1927, and stuff keeps going on. So now, again, if they would have just opened the pages of this great book, the Holy Quran says, and hold fast by the covenant of Allah altogether, and be not disunited. And remember Allah's favor on you when you were enemies. Then he united your hearts, so by his favor you became brethren. And you were on the brink of a pit of fire, then he saved you from it. Thus Allah makes clear to you his messages that you may be guided. And that's from Holy Quran, Surah 3, verse 103. Now, interestingly enough, in the footnote of that, it talks about the brink of fire. Because time is amongst us, I'm just going to explain. It says that the brink of fire, or the pit of fire, was used as an analogy for war. Because they were saying that during that time of the prophet, when they would signal a war, they would light a fire to let you, to signal that a war was going on. And so this is the Quran telling them, this is where you came from. You all used to fight each other all the time, and it was Allah that united you and made you brethren. But how did they break up? Is because they no longer recognized each other as brethren and started fighting. So they literally regress.
Yeah.
This is Allah's word, and they totally disregard it.
Yeah.
And another quote, and it says, whoever kills a believer intentionally, his punishment is hell by the end, and Allah is wroth with him who has cursed him and prepared for him a grievous chastisement. That's what all of this was. Muslims killing Muslims intentionally, which the Quran forbids.
Right. Yeah.
And that's, again, today. If we just open this book, we can find the answer to all of our problems. It's not just, a spirity book. It has some very good, solid advice for real life stuff. Now, I'm going to end on this. This is the modern map of that area. Saudi Arabia now, right? And we saw how Saudi Arabia, how it was the Najd and the Hijaz. Now he's taking over all of this at the prodding of the British, right? The British, now, you remember that trucial state or trucial state? Now we have the United Arab Emirates. So let me see if I can put these two together. Right? Now we have the United Arab Emirates, right? We have Palestine up there. What we have Iraq, and also another thing about this, now all this is Saudi Arabia. It's no longer just. So you see how all these things change, and then also another part of this is that Lebanon was not a country before World War I. Same thing with Turkey, was not a country before World War I. Right? I guess that's my time right there. But now we see how the geopolitics of this area has changed because of World War I. Right? So now we have these new places. It was Yemen and Ad. Now this has all been together. This was the trucial states that became the United Arab Emirates. Lebanon was a part of that sea treaty. That was a French territory, Lebanon. That was supposed to be that. And we have Israel now, which wasn't there before. And it is in the same area of the world that we have more fighting, because of the carryover of the reneging and double dealing of the British Empire. Arabs are still being used to fight other Arabs, and Muslims are to fight Muslims, but it's all contrived. It's not really, it is not a real holy war based off of righteous principles.
No.
These are the wars of men of power and ambition, who behind doors have made deals that some of them came to bite them in the behind. Some of them have made, others, successful. But the thing about it is that these people know what happened. They have not forgotten what happened. And so they are not just going to lay down and let somebody keep doing this to them. And there were things that happened in Europe as well. But we don't be focusing on this part because this is us. And so there are lessons to be learned from this. But I think this is like a poignant part to look at. That's today. That's what it used to be. And then later, even after that, because Ibn Saud, getting Saudi Arabia, becoming Saudi Arabia, then that begins what the oil boom with Aramco, which takes us into more modern history, takes us all the way up to the 80s. And so that's kind of a different time. So I just wanted to stop right here and, I want to close with thank you for your patience. And assalamu alaikum.
Supreme wisdom, some call it the lessons, but I call it life, actual facts, no guessing.